Harbor parents, what is up? Happy day, happy day. I hope you're doing fantastic. BT Harmon here. It is so good to kind of connect to you. I wish I could see all your faces watching this. But gosh, it's been a while since we've done a Harbor Live. For any new Harbor parents that we have, Harbor Live is roughly our quarterly interview with someone. So I have made some fun connections sort of in the Christian LGBTQ space, and I absolutely love bringing some of my friends into Skype for an interview where we can kind of ask questions, dig into their stories, sort of in the way that you expect, which is always a way that is hopefully leading with love, leading with respect, leading with dignity, offering respect to those on all parts of the theological spectrum, both affirming and traditional. So today's guest, guys, you're going to love this. Today's guest is very exciting. I'm super excited. I have seen Amber's name floating around the internet all over the place for the last couple of years. Her story has been picked up and covered by media outlets just because it's so darn interesting. And as always, the only kind of guests that I bring onto Harbor or Harbor Live are kind ones. Those who lead with grace, lead with empathy. All of us have our strong and various opinions about theology and about sexuality. But one thing I require of all of our guests is, again, that they're just kind, nice, and generally good people. And from what I know of Amber, she is certainly that way. Reading different things that she's written online, listening to her in podcasts. But she's the author of now two books, and we'll talk about her latest book that just recently came out. But she is all around awesome. So Amber, welcome to Harbor Live.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you guys.
Yeah, so I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. So start us off by first tell us, where are you calling in from today?
I'm from Denver, Colorado.
Great.
Way out by the airport. So almost not Denver, but still technically Denver.
Gotcha. Denver-ish.
Denver-ish.
But you told me earlier, I know you have a connection to Montana. You were there for a while?
I was born there. I was born in Kalispell, Montana. And a lot of my extended family still is kind of in the Billings area. So initial, grassroots up that way, but majority of my life been in Colorado.
Gotcha. Yeah, Montana's one of those states. I feel like you never meet people, from Montana or have a Montana connection. I've always said that about like Idaho. I'm like, is Idaho a real state? I don't know anyone from there. And I actually have been to Montana, so I do know that it's real. But
I think Montana has, a lot of transplants from Colorado have come from Montana. So
okay.
They have a lot of similarities in kind of their beauty and their mountains and their weather. And so I think people migrate from Montana down to Colorado.
That makes sense.
They probably don't make it out to Georgia where you're at. Probably not many transplant that far.
Probably not. They can't handle the humidity and nor would I want them to. So, well, cool. Hey, I want to start off by just asking you to share your story. I know geographically you went from Montana to Colorado Springs, so I'll just use that as kind of a segue. Tell us the Amber Cantorna story.
Well, I was born in Montana, but we actually transplanted to Southern California first when I was about 3, because that's when my dad started working for Focus on the Family. And so we spent a few years out there in Southern Cal. And then when Focus on the Family moved to Colorado Springs to base their headquarters there in 91 is when we transplanted there. So I was about 7 at the time and really kind of grew up in that evangelical Christian world, where Focus on the Family kind of transplanted there, but at the same time, a lot of other evangelical Christian organizations kind of moved into Colorado Springs and set up their headquarters there. So it became a very evangelical-centric city, and it still tends to be that way. Still, a lot of the headquarters for many ministries are based there in Colorado Springs. And so I grew up in that kind of evangelical Christian conservative culture, and that was really all that I knew. My dad worked at Focus on the Family. My mom stayed home and raised us, and I was homeschooled all my life. And so my mom was really good at homeschooling. She was great at creating a very warm, welcoming environment. She was great at doing holidays that were meaningful and special. And those are memories that I still look back on very fondly because they're things that, my family did really well. But it also kind of being cocooned in very much of a Christian bubble. So I wasn't really what I realized as I got older is that I wasn't exposed to really diversity of any kind, because my world was so small. And I think my parents, in their minds, worked really hard to kind of protect me from the outside world and keep me sheltered and safe. But what that kind of ended up doing for me then is, not giving me the ability to recognize my sexual orientation earlier on, because I wasn't really exposed to diversity of any kind, and so not having the language to put around that, I think, made it very difficult for me to be able to kind of realize early on that I was gay. Looking back at it now, of course, I can, pinpoint it from very early elementary age. But at the time, I didn't have the exposure or the language to be able to put with that. And I also was very much entrenched in that purity culture movement, where true love waits and you save sex for marriage. And I even had a whole purity ceremony at my 13th birthday party where all my friends and family came and did this kind of big coming of age womanhood ceremony for me. And so my family was very much supportive of that, as was I at the time, because I really that was just kind of what you did as a good Christian woman. And that was kind of not only what was expected of you, but, what I truly wanted to do, because I wanted to honor God with my life. And that was just kind of what you did as part of honoring God. And so I had a whole ceremony. I put a ring on my finger. I signed a covenant. And that really carried me for years and years and years. This idea of, if you just serve God with your life and you just do what God's asked of you, then someday your knight in shining armor is going to come riding in on a white horse and sweep you off your feet to happily ever after. And so that's kind of just what I always kept waiting for, and never really had this understanding of, I knew I was lonely, but I just was like, well, I'm just going to keep waiting, right? And then eventually God's going to reward me for my faithfulness. And so I think that also really kind of blinded me from being able to recognize my sexual orientation, because I never dated at all. So I had no experience, no exposure to be able to really identify that something different was going on inside of me from all my friends. And it really wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I was able to start recognizing that something was really going on here that was deeper. And so I had when I was about 22, 23, I had a roommate that ended up falling for my female roommate. And that was kind of the
in college
shocking, post-college.
Gotcha. Okay.
Post-college. Yeah. Because I was homeschooled, I kind of fast tracked through school, and I graduated high school at 16 and had my college degree by 18.
Oh my gosh.
So
homeschool kids are so smart.
I really fast tracked, but I think there was, pluses and minuses to that as I look back. At the time, I loved being able to self-pace, and I loved being, academically I was always ahead, but socially I was behind, because every group that I went into, I was the youngest of that group. So maturity-wise, I was on their level, yes, but socially it was awkward, because I was never really fitting in anywhere I went, because I was always the youngest and looked down as kind of the baby of the group, because I was always a step ahead of all my peers.
Right.
So there was definitely challenges that came with that too, I think. And yeah, just kind of mixed emotions looking back as to, was that the right thing for me? Should I have done things differently? What would that have looked like? But yeah, so post-college, then for me, by 5 years or so, is when I started kind of realizing that something was very different going on. And for me, that was devastating, because that was kind of the one thing you were supposed to never be, was to be gay. There was kind of like this hierarchy of sins, and that was, at the top. And
oh yeah.
And especially coming from that focus on the family where everybody looked up to you and you were kind of this icon for them and role model. And so that was really a devastating reality. And I really didn't know what to do with that. That was, it was scary. It was hard. It was I didn't really know how to navigate that because I never had been exposed to somebody who had navigated that before. I felt like the only one that would dare come up gay in a Christian family,
Yeah,
like I
right.
felt super isolated, super alone, and
Did you
that
have,
was really hard.
yeah. Did you have siblings, Amber?
I had a younger brother.
Oh, you had
Yeah.
one younger brother. Okay. And
One
did
year.
you date boys growing up at all or,
No, not at all. Because of
gotcha.
that kind of purity culture element,
Yeah.
I never dated at all. So that was, um, I think another missing piece where all my friends who were dating, were able to have kind of those experiences. But because I never dated, I was, I think, kind of unable to even realize that I didn't really have a desire to date, like
Right.
that desire wasn't even there. Because I just was waiting for my, knight in shining armor to come along after all these years of
Right.
serving God and being single. So yeah, it really, blindsided me when it happened.
Yeah, it's funny how I forget how closely our stories track. We both were growing up in these traditional Christian homes, and I was the same way. I did not date through high school. And I think it was like you. It was like there was no draw for me to ask a girl out. And
Yeah.
the timing
Yeah.
again of the purity culture stuff, particularly for me. Ike stating goodbye, which may have been a little bit older than
Hmm.
your
Oh no, that
was
was
it right? Okay,
absolutely. Oh,
okay.
yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And it actually provided, kind of the perfect cover because, it kind of allowed me to hide
Right.
behind that
Right.
and think, and everyone thought, oh, well, Brett is he's such a good godly man. He doesn't have time for, these carnal pursuits of
Yep.
dating, which
Yep.
looking
Yep.
back, I just cringed that was the dynamic that was happening. But it sounds like we both were taking advantage of that, as best we could.
Right, right. And I would look at my friends and be like, watch them kind of date and break up and break up. And I was like, oh, God's just saving me from all that heartache,
Right. Yeah, totally. Okay. So I think in your story, we said you fell for a roommate, pick up right there. And that's kind of when you began to sort of really feel like something was different.
Yeah. And in the midst of that, my parents actually found out about that relationship.
Wow.
And so this was kind of exposed momentarily because she ended up leaving and it was, kind of a mess. And they said, Amber, don't ever tell anybody about this because if you do, it will ruin your reputation forever. And so I didn't tell anybody and I just harbored it deep inside and it just ate away at me. And it just turned into a lot of negativity in my life, a lot of self-hatred, a lot of anxiety and depression and even self-injury and just a really dark place. And
you
so
were mid-20s at this point, Amber?
Mid-20s, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, mid-20s, yeah.
Gotcha.
And so, just really in a dark place, not knowing what to do or how to navigate that.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I was like, I have to face my greatest fear. Cause if I don't, it's going to be the thing that kills me.
Yeah.
And so I really had to get to the point where I was willing and able to look that in the face. And it terrified me because I didn't want to just, read the scripture to justify my way of life or, water down the gospel or, these things that people tell you. I really wanted to know what God said about it and I wanted to know the truth. And I was just as terrified to find out that God, approved or was okay with same-sex relationships as to find out that God was not, because I knew that either way my life was going to drastically change.
Yeah. Wow.
And nothing was going to be the same no matter what I found. And so that was terrifying for me. And so, I did a number of things to try and navigate that. I went to therapy. I did a lot of, just kind of self-introspection. I tried to find books to read, which, at that time, when you and I were coming out, there wasn't much in terms of kind of faith and sexuality. I think we've got a lot more resources now than we did, 7 to 10 years ago. And I'm so grateful for that. But it was really hard to navigate at the time, not having those resources and support. So I kind of did the best that I could. But really, I think the turning point for me was finding an affirming community. And it just happened kind of out of sheer desperation, not knowing what else to do. I sat down to my computer one day and I typed in something like gay church or gay affirming church or, and not really knowing what I would find, if anything. I didn't even know if that existed or was a thing.
Were you in Denver at the time or still Colorado Springs?
No. I was still in Colorado Springs.
Okay.
Yeah. So I knew there was not going to be anything in that area. Like I knew I wouldn't find anything in that area. But a church in Denver popped up, and that's what kind of piqued my interest. And so, I was kind of on my last rope, like just not knowing what to do. And just out of desperation, reached out to this pastor and just poured out my heart and sent it off into cyberspace. And I don't think I really even expected to get a response in return. I came from a 14,000 person mega church. So you email the pastor and, it's weeks before you hear anything back, if at all, and so I just never really expected it to go anywhere. And I kid you not, 2 or 3 hours went by before I got this long handwritten, heartfelt email back from the pastor.
Wow.
And he just was so warm and so welcoming and just said, please come visit. I will set you up with somebody to meet you and to sit with you and to take you to lunch. And, I was like, is he joking? Like, it was such a foreign concept to me. And so I did, and I went, and I was so terrified, and I didn't know what I was going to find or what it was going to look like when I walked through those doors. But, you have all these kind of preconceived notions in your mind of what it might be like. But I walked in the door, and it was like everybody looked normal, like they were just people like me. Like there was no drag queens, there was no people making out in the hall. There was no, you have
burning Bibles and crosses.
Yeah. You have this kind of stuff made up in your mind of what it might be like. And they were just normal people. And, they were so warm and so rich and so, authentic and, people that had been with their, and it was diverse in its in the people there and, really just, people that had been with their same-sex partner or spouse for 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
And they were loving God and loving their significant other. And there was no conflict in between for them. And I just remember looking at that and thinking, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And something clicked in me that day, something changed.
Yeah.
And I remember going home and writing in my journal, I've reached the point of no return.
Right.
I knew I had passed something where there was no going back.
Right.
Because I saw that it was possible for me to live, fully and authentically as myself and still love God and be loved by God. Gosh,
that's awesome. Can I go back just 1 second?
Sure.
You mentioned earlier when your parents found out about the relationship. Can you talk more about kind of their reaction? Were there conversations? Was there, shouting matches? Was there lectures? How did that? Because again, I'm just so fascinated with the fact that your dad is literally an executive that focused on the family, which is, in a lot of ways made its way or been sort of a driver of the church's strong stance against homosexuality. I'm really curious, how did they respond and how did you react to that?
Well, initially when they found out, it wasn't like I was coming out. It was kind of like this big mistake that never should have happened.
Gotcha.
So there was a conversation about it. She ended up leaving and outing me, which was horrible. And my parents showed up on my doorstep at 6 a.m. And, so there was definitely a conversation to be had, but it was kind of this idea of we're just going to brush this under the rug and pretend like it never happened kind of initially. So then I kind of went back into the closet and we just didn't talk about it.
Okay.
And so it wasn't until I had kind of reconciled all this stuff for myself, that I actually really came out to them. And so that was several years later. So gotcha. once I had kind of been able to solidify that in my heart and realize, that, or be able to accept myself really, and know that I was okay with God and I was okay with myself. I knew I was going to have to come out. My family was so close. We were so intertwined. We talked all the time. We saw each other all the time. We all lived within a mile of each other. You can't escape that. It's not like we were on separate ends of the country or, we were all super close. And so I knew that I was going to have to come out to them. And I really, I just, the anticipation of it for months leading up to and trying to find the right time and when that was going to be and what that was going to look like. And I think I knew that, I didn't expect them to be like, oh, we're so excited for you. And that's great. I knew that wasn't going to be the case. I knew they wouldn't necessarily agree. But I I think I had a hard time gauging where on that spectrum they were going to land. And I think deep down, my greatest fear was that it could cost me everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that I was prepared for the fact that it actually would.
Right.
And so the day came, and it's been almost exactly 7 years ago, because it was shortly after Easter in 2012.
Wow.
So it's been almost 7 years.
And you were how old at this point?
I was 27.
So 27, you go to the affirming church, you decide, I've got to tell my parents.
So, well, I took about 6 months and drove back and forth from Colorado Springs to Denver every Sunday and visited this church. So I took some time, and actually, I guess it wasn't a full 6 months before I came out, but it was about 6 months that I did that trek back and forth. Gotcha. And then I moved to Denver as a result. But yeah, so finally I sit them down and I come out to them, and I tried to like really preempt their questions and tell them about the journey that I'd been on, and tell them about the journey that I had been on with God, because I knew that was going to be their greatest fear, right? Mm-hmm. Was how that was going to affect my relationship with God. But they just glazed over and tuned out, and I don't think they heard a word that I said. And so finally, I kind of get the words out there and tell them that I'm gay, and it's the most vulnerable I've ever felt in my life, and it just kind of hangs in the air with silence, waiting for their response. And my dad just looked at me and he said, I have nothing to say to you. And he got up and walked out the door.
Gosh.
Wow. And, it was probably about 3 weeks after that before we spoke again.
How did mom respond?
Well, she didn't say much either. She just kind of said like, thanks for being honest with us, and we'll have to see what this means for the future of our family. Yeah. And I was like, the future of our family? Like, what do you, yeah. What do you mean, and so it was just like, I've shared my deepest fears and pains with you, and you walked out the door, there was no conversation, there was nothing. It was just, they were gone. And so I had like days and weeks of like waiting for this like anticipated response. And when I think I had hoped that when we got back together, they would have like taken some time to really think about the journey that I'd been on and try and understand my point of view and all that. But it just kept getting worse. And so we sat down and had a conversation where they compared me to murderers and to pedophiles and bestiality, and said how selfish that you do this to our family and not think about how this would impact us, which of course that was like all I had thought about for months, was like how this was going to impact our family. Yeah. But they said, we feel like you've died, and it was just awful. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And when the conversation was over, they asked for the keys to their house back. And, as I'm like walking out the door leaving, they asked for the keys back to their house.
Was there any caveat of, if, basically, I guess it was an ultimatum of, we're now rejecting you. However, if you decide to repent and reject this and come back, we'll embrace you with open arms.
Yeah, pretty much. Because they would say like, the door is always open if you ever want to come back to Jesus and come back to us, or we'll keep praying that you change, or, like they definitely wanted me to, they would say like, I wish you would have told us sooner so we could have taken you to Love One Out or XK therapy, or, and so I think they definitely wanted that for me. But because I was coming out as a gay Christian woman, that was something they just couldn't do. And it was, they couldn't even agree to disagree. They couldn't even get to that place. And it took me a long time to figure out why, because I thought, well, we can come from different viewpoints and still agree to disagree and have a relationship. But it wasn't really until I was writing my first book and writing, thinking through my story from all these different angles, that it dawned on me in their minds to agree to disagree. Cause they'd say that's the same as condoning. But I think in their minds, to agree to disagree, they already think that my soul's in jeopardy of going to hell. And by even associating with me puts their soul in jeopardy of going to hell.
Yeah.
And I think that somehow in their mind, that's how they connect that, is by, well, if we're condoning and we're saying that we're just going to live in this space and be okay, then by not standing up against it, we're also putting our own souls in jeopardy of hell.
Yeah.
And I think that's how they, would explain that.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I've always had this theory. I don't know that I've ever vocalized it, but I've always had a theory that the higher in some level of social status that parents are, the more difficult it is when your child comes out. Essentially it's like,
Yeah.
because parents quickly can associate having a gay child with, oh, that's going to dramatically affect my social status, whether that's at your church or at the country club or at a large evangelical ministry. And so that's why I have so much compassion, for people like you who you're dealing with this in a bizarrely kind of not public way, but your parents are probably receiving this information as, how will this affect us publicly, or how will this affect the ministry, the organization?
Absolutely.
Do you feel like that's a thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. And they've told me that multiple times, that, I'm embarrassed by you and how this looks to, hundreds of thousands of fans that I've worked with for, 25, 30 years. Or, my mom's always been very concerned, even though my dad's the one kind of with the bigger reputation. My mom's always been very concerned with how things look to other people and with reputation and appearances. And so that definitely, I think, plays a very big factor in the way that they respond.
Yeah. How did their response sit with you from for lack of a better term, a devastation scale? Were you utterly devastated by their response, or was it kind of like you were expecting it, you were prepared for it, and you quickly kind of moved on?
Oh no, I was devastated.
Yeah.
I was absolutely devastated because I knew, like I said, I knew that they weren't going to be real accepting, but I wasn't prepared for something that drastic. And
full rejection.
It really, full rejection all out, and it over time, it just kept getting worse, we went from talking every day on the phone just about to like rarely talking. And when you did, it was very superficial and very strained and very awkward. And to not being included in family events, to not, it was sometimes words and sometimes just very passive aggressive behavior that really pushed me out and said, you're no longer welcome in the family. And so it was very devastating for me. And I, pretty quickly, it was probably about 3 months after I came out that I picked up and moved to Denver because it was just like purely trying to survive. I was very suicidal. And just being closer to that affirming community and that support that I had was what I needed to really like pull me through that time. And I really believe that if I hadn't had that community, I may not have made it.
Yeah. Wow.
It was just a very, very dark time.
Yeah. So this was a full blown rejection. I mean, did they lay down terms of, we're no longer talking, or was that how it kind of moved forward from there? Or?
They didn't outwardly say that for a while. Like we had probably 2 years of just very strained, very awkward, I kept wanting to like try and prove to them that I was still the same child they'd always had. And they just saw me as completely different. And it was just really strained, relationship for probably about 2 years that just continually like kept getting worse and worse and worse. And it wasn't until right after I got married that they just completely cut me off altogether.
Gotcha.
So, I think when I first came, I was single when I came out. So I think at first they thought, well, there's still hope for her to change. And then I started dating about a year later, and then I got engaged, and then, and I think getting married was kind of the final step for them of like, it
made it really real for them. Yeah. Sort
very,
of irreversible.
Yeah.
So talk to us about you said you entered the dating phase of life about a year after that. Tell us how did that go? And you mentioned marriage. So tell us how you got there.
Yeah. So, well, it was about a year after I came out. So that year of coming out, there was just so many horrific events that all happened in that year. And not only my coming out, but my dad had very, very serious health issue, and my grandfather unexpectedly passed away. And it was just a series of horrific events. But right about a year after that, when I started kind of turning the corner, because I knew when I came out, like I wasn't ready to date yet. Like I needed some space to process, to kind of, to heal from a lot of the, to move on. So I knew I wasn't ready to date, but kind of as I was turning that corner of coming out of this just horrific year is when and so we, pretty quickly just knew that this was going to be, something that we wanted to do together for life. And we both were at a point in our lives where we knew what we wanted and we knew what we wanted for our future. And so we're like, we're not going to take years of prolonging this when we know what we want. And so, we dated and then we got engaged, and we've been married for almost 5 years. So it's been, like in the dating phase, that was, I think, a really good counterbalance to all the grief I was still experiencing, because it was this interesting kind of teeter-totter of I am simultaneously losing everything, and yet I'm happier than I've ever been in my whole life, And so this kind of this back and forth of emotions, and yet I feel like even in the midst of all that I've lost, I feel like I came alive the day that I came out. Like I've never felt more free. I've never felt more at peace. I've never felt more at home in my own skin. I feel like I finally figured out why I had wrestled for so many years, even through my teenage years and everything. It's like I finally got it, and being able to step into who I was meant to be and to be free in that has been so liberating. I mean, I feel like my family's missed the happiest years of my life.
Wow.
That they've missed these years where I've finally become who I was always meant to be.
Yeah.
And so that's been really hard, to know that they've missed that, and there's really no way of getting those years back.
Yeah.
But I mean, meeting Clara and getting married and our life together has been the best thing that's ever happened to me. Like I love the life that we're building together. And yes, it's been hard because we don't have family, and so there's been challenges that come with that. But I love the life that we have. I love the life that we're building together, and I wouldn't ever trade that for anything.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Well, congrats on being married. You're 5 years down the road, so a little bit further than where I am with Brett, but that's awesome. So yeah, it's so funny.
Yeah.
Like just you talking about, there is something that happens, there was a big shift for me even in meeting my person, because there was always this sort of fear of, because of all the residual, teaching that was just swirling around in my mind, there was this fear of, well, Brett, maybe you will meet someone, but because this is wrong, it's never going to work. You guys will never truly fit together. Men don't belong with men. Men belong with women. And therefore, you can try this, but deep down, this is not going to bring joy. And hearing you talk, I think what we both discovered is that the opposite of that was true, where, I think you and me, we share the same, like we grew up in the church. We were taught right from wrong. We were taught the things of God. We were taught the things of the Bible. And I'm the kind of person now where I still, when I do something wrong, when I sin, I am quickly besieged with guilt over that. I am quickly, in a lot of ways, prompted towards repentance, if I say something, short to Brett. And so I think there's this misconception that, gay Christians, we have hardened our hearts against the things of God. And therefore, we are filled and shot through with sin through and through. When what's interesting for people like me and you is, no, we're still actually very sensitive to doing what's right and to honoring God with holiness. Mm-hmm. And what I found, and I think it's what you just described, is, there was a gut level examination of when I began dating and when I was finally with Brett of, wait a minute, like I'm in a gay relationship, but I'm not being besieged with guilt. That is still happening in a lot of other things when I mess up.
Yeah.
It's not happening here. And in fact, the opposite is true. I'm experiencing greater levels of peace, greater levels of thriving, greater levels of self-health, and so, does that make sense? Do you resonate with
Absolutely. That? Yeah. Absolutely. I feel like the fruit of the Spirit in my life has been so much more abundant as I've stepped into that than it was before, when I was constantly living with shame and guilt and condemnation in my life. That was producing very negative fruit in my life, and very obvious negative fruit. And being able to step into that has actually done the opposite and brought joy and peace and love. And I would even say, being with Clara has drawn me closer to God and helped me know God deeper in other ways that I hadn't previously. And, and so I think it's been a very beautiful thing.
Yeah. Tell me about, hearing your story, Amber, I think I would be chronically paralyzed with anger on a daily basis, like knowing what you've been through. I think where our stories diverge is that I never experienced that family rejection. Thankfully, my mom, though we've had our issues and disagreements, thankfully we have maintained a healthy relationship. How have you dealt with that? And my follow-up question is, are you angry? Like, are you mad? Is that something you deal with?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm in therapy.
Hooray. Yay.
So therapy is good. But yeah, and I've been in, there's been different seasons of my life where I've done therapy. And so, but I mean, I'm 7 years out and there still is grief and pain and loss, it doesn't go away. You don't get over it, when you're rejected, because it wasn't just my parents. It was my brother, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, the majority of my friends, I lost everything.
Wow.
And really had to start again. And so, I don't know that you ever really get over that, but you kind of learn to live with that loss. And, there are times that I'm angry, and, there's days where I'm sad and there's days where I'm hurt and there's it ebbs and flows, I think. It doesn't ever just be like, oh, well, I've arrived now and I'm no longer sad over this,
Right.
I grieve for what could have or should have been, and I think that's the constant loss and the grief that or the pain that I feel is the loss of what could have been.
Yeah.
And that I think is what I miss, especially when it comes to the holidays and things like that continue to be hard. I've had seasons of intense nightmares. I've had seasons of just a lot of dreams about maybe not even nightmares, but just continual dreams about my family. I've had seasons of, I think it just ebbs and flows a lot. But I guess there is a certain level of me that knows that on some level, my parents are doing what they really believe God has called them to do. Right. That doesn't excuse their behavior or how they've treated me, but it does give me a certain degree of compassion for them.
Yeah.
Because I think they have a lot of fear. Fear of what other people think, fear of what God thinks, fear of going to hell, I think there's a lot of fear underlying in their beliefs. And so that does give me a certain amount of compassion. But there are still days where I'm angry and, a lot where I'm hurt and sad that they've missed these happiest years of my life.
Yeah.
So it still is hard. It's not like, oh, I've just, I've healed from all this and now it's all gone and I never have to deal with it again. It's still there. But I still would not ever go back to the life that I had before, even though I've lost so much. Like, this life is so rich and so full and so authentic, that I would never trade it,
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel you. We've got a couple of questions that Harbor parents sent in. The first one is from Gina. She asks, I love kind of the simplicity of this question. Amber, how did you have the courage to persevere and endure?
I don't know. I think I've always had this perpetual hope inside of me that would never quite give up. Even in these moments where I really wanted to just give up, it was like there was just something in me that couldn't. That couldn't quite let go, that couldn't quite give up. And so I think this, I don't know, maybe determination or sheer willpower. But I also, in the coming out process, I knew that when I was trying to come to terms with who I was, it was a do or die situation for me. You're either going to figure this out and move forward or it's going to kill you.
Yeah.
Cause I was in that dark of a place. So I think that was kind of what pushed me through that season. Through the coming out season, I think it was really, the decision that I made to move to Denver and be close to affirming people, really, I think saved my life. Having that support underneath me, in some of my darkest days, really saved my life. And my puppy, I would say, would be the other component that saved my life. I think we underestimate the power of an animal, like
Yeah.
just that person that's there for you, that always loves you, that is truly unconditional love, and was always there to cuddle with me and to be there, just an extra heartbeat in the house that, it just provided me with so much comfort in those days that, really, I think those two things, and it just gave me a reason to get up in the morning, and, somebody I had to feed and I had to take for a walk, and just those simple things that gave you like routine and normalcy in your day, carried me from one day to the next during that dark season. And so I really think that just, the companionship of an animal and the support of an affirming community are really the things that carried me through, those days when I just didn't know if I was going to make it.
Yep. Never underestimate the power of Jesus and a fur
Puppy
baby.
love.
That's right. That's
Yep.
right.
Jesus, fur babies.
You have one. How many dogs do you have? Two?
I've got two.
Two.
Yeah.
What kind are they?
I've got two. Half Pint, is a Shih Tzu Maltese, poodle mix. And she's the one that, was there with me from the very beginning.
Oh, sweet little half pint. I love that. I love that name.
Yeah, she's my baby. She's sleeping on my feet right now. And then we've since adopted another one, little Anne, and she's a Maltese Yorkie mix.
I love it.
And so she's a sweetheart too. It took her a while. She was a very feisty puppy, but she's coming into her sweetness now. And
good.
The love phase of, mellowing out, and the real endearing phase of puppiness.
Love it. I love it. Good. All right. Next question comes from a Harbor parent, Terry. And they say, how can I encourage someone hurt and damaged by the church that God still loves them and they can have a relationship with him?
I think loving them wherever they're at in their process is really helpful, because a lot of people have been so damaged by the church, or they've been rejected by people in the name of God. And a lot of them have to step away from church for a while, or maybe they don't come back, but having that space to kind of step away and process, everybody handles it differently. Everybody's experience is different, but I think just loving them, and showing them love no matter where they're at in their process is very, helpful, just to know that they always have a space with you and they can always be themselves with you. And there's no, caveat or condition to that, to be able to be themselves, I think is really critical. And I think they will see God's love in your actions a lot more than your words.
Yep.
And whether their faith evolves or they step away from church or whatever that looks like for them, having that safe place where they can go, I think is really critical.
That's really good. This next question, Amber, is sort of from me, but I'll ask you the $1 million question. It's the question I get all the time. And I got it so frequently, I actually have a 3-hour video series now that explains it. So I know it's a complex question, but give us sort of just as quick as you can make it, the short summary of, you talked about how, what kind of got you on that affirming road was really the community aspect. But I assume that later in your journey, there became a more theological or scriptural aspect. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that process looked like for you?
Yeah, and it really was during that same period. I think it all kind of happened around the same time. I did my best to kind of research books that talked about the historical and, cultural aspects of the Bible, and talked about what we would call the clobber passages, and tried to dissect that theologically. And so I didn't have the best resources. Like we've got a lot better resources now, but I did what I could with that. And I think also, like a lot of people will ask me, well, why did you never walk away from the church? Why did you never walk away from God? And for me, I think I had a series of years during my teens that were really foundational for me, where I didn't really have anywhere to go to talk about the stuff I was going through. I didn't have a safe space. And so I would just go to church and sit in the back with my Bible and my journal for hours and hours and just journal and journal. So I've got stacks of journals.
Wow.
From just those years with God. And I think having those foundational years really set the stage for then when I came out, because I was able to separate what people were doing to me or saying to me in the name of God from what I had known of God myself. And I think that really, those foundational years, if I hadn't had those, I don't know if I would have walked away or not. I might have. I think having that relationship with God on a very personal level, so deep for so many years, really kind of walked me and gave me that undercurrent to be able to walk the journey ahead. So I really credit it to those years where I just sat for hours and hours and hours with my journal and my Bible and my worship music, that I think it really is what carried me through, and seeing the fruit in my life and in other people's lives. Kind of like I said earlier, with when I was in that place of just self-condemnation, self-hatred, the bad fruit that it was producing in my life, the shame, the guilt, the self-injury, the depression, the anxiety, all these things that was producing in my life were not creating goodness or happiness or joy or peace, and when I was finally able to walk into that and accept who I was, there was this overwhelming fear of what was going to happen, but there was also like this deep rooted peace and joy of like, I finally found it. I finally found that missing piece that completes me, and I know who I am. And so finding that rooted in my soul, I think really helped carry me through too.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I love it. Well, good. Well, hey, let's turn towards, I know you've got exciting stuff going on. You're super busy right now because you are launching a new book soon.
I am. We've got about 5 days to go, so we're getting super close.
I love it. I'm sure you're just running around crazy. I know you've been doing interviews and promoting the book. So tell us about the book, and tell us about it.
Sure. Well, as I toured for my first book, Refocusing My Family, which is my story, it's a memoir, I'm telling my story. As I traveled and spoke, I saw and met people from all over that had the same story as me. Like your dad doesn't have to work at Focus for you to have been brought up under Focus in the Family and James Dobson's values. And so I just met hundreds and thousands of people that were walking the same journey, walking the same story. And as I did that, I continued to get the same questions over and over and over and over of how do I know if I'm ready to come out? And what if I'm in ministry? What if my parents are in ministry? Is it okay to be out to some people and not to others? Just all these same questions. And so that is what this next book is. Unashamed is going to be the first coming out guide for LGBT Christians that help them be able to first accept themselves and then know when they're ready to come out to other people, and how to do that in a way that is productive and healthy, and how to grieve loss and rejection, and how to set healthy boundaries, and how to manage self-care, and all those just really practical things. We haven't really had anything like that yet. We've got kind of the theological aspect, but not a lot from just a very practical aspect. And so that's what this next book will be. And it launches next Tuesday, March 12th. So I'm really excited to do that. And I'm going to get to travel and speak quite a bit again and share that message with people, and really excited to get it into their hands. And at the end of every chapter, we've got a section for parents and allies too, that kind of helps coach them of how to best support their loved one through this particular season or period of their coming out process. So reading it from a parent or ally's perspective would really give them an idea of what it's like to walk in an LGBT Christian's shoes. And then also give them ideas of how to really support their loved one through that.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Do you have any specific tips for the parents who are watching? How can they continue to support their child?
Well, I think it's different depending on different times in their coming out process, where they're at in their process. I think very simple things are including them like you would include anyone else. Don't treat them differently just because they're gay. They will pick up on that. They will know they will feel that ostracization. They will feel that alienation. Don't treat them any differently. Just love them without conditions. That is really what they need more than anything. People say, well, how do I keep my loved one connected to God, and connected to their faith? And I guarantee that if you love them without conditions, that's going to keep them connected to their faith, because they're not going to have that disconnection between, God has conditions for my love because my parents have conditions for loving me. So by loving them without conditions, even if you don't understand, just loving them gives them that assurance that God loves them too, and they don't have to change. And so I think that's a huge component to helping them remain healthy and whole in their coming out process.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I love your book. I got an advanced copy and was able to get through it. And I wrote a little blurb for your book, sort of an endorsement. And what I said in the blurb is true, which is, this book in some ways is a game changer to me for, closeted gay Christians out there, particularly those who are younger. I mean, that's what I love the era we're living in now, is there are resources being created that have never existed. I'm thinking about right now, there's a 15-year-old girl in Colorado, perhaps, who's struggling with her sexuality, and she's going to find this book and she's going to read it, and it's going to be a huge beacon of hope for her, and it's going to help her navigate what me and you had to do on our own, where we were in a very small way, pioneering this horrible experience of dealing with the shame, carrying this burden, not knowing how people are going to react, and we just had to kind of wing it. And I love that this next generation doesn't have to wing it. They have voices like yours that they can look to for inspiration. And to me, that's awesome. So hear me say, thank you for the time you've put into this. And I hope the world receives it with open arms.
Thanks. I appreciate it. It's meant to be like a traveling companion, cool. I hope they feel that somebody is walking alongside them as they take their journey, so they don't feel as isolated as you and I felt, Yeah.
I love that. Well, Amber, I want to jump to, I like to end on sort of a lighter, sillier note. So we're going to talk in a minute about your new hobby, which I want everyone to hear about because it's just kind of interesting / a little bit weird, but I've done it as well.
A little bit weird.
But before we jump to that, again, Harbor parents are watching. I think Harbor parents are fantastic. They are further down the road than 99% of other Christian parents out there dealing with this issue. Harbor parents are generous. They're humble. They're open to new ideas. They're open to being challenged. So, what advice is there advice you would give again to our Harbor parents for what can they do to love, support, understand their LGBTQ child better?
I would say try to understand them. Ask curious questions. If you don't understand something, I even talk about this in the book. I give a list of terms and phrases that are often offensive to LGBT people that you may not even realize are offensive to them. And so asking curious questions about, well, why is this offensive? Or what can I do to support you better? Help me understand why you identify this way. Asking curious questions with a really not a caveat of changing them, but just a real genuine desire to understand, I think goes a long way in creating a good safety between you and a good trust and a relationship that you can build upon. If they feel like they can share their heart with you, if they feel like you're trying to understand them, they will open up more and share those experiences with you. And that's an opportunity for you to learn and grow of what it's like to be in their shoes. So I think always be open to understanding and learning new things.
Yeah. Empathy. It goes a long way. Cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell us about your new hobby. We want to hear all about
it. My new self-care hobby is floating.
Floating? What is that?
Like in a float tank, you go to these places and you have like a 90-minute session in a float tank that's like filled with a massive amount of Epsom salt. So you lay in there and you float in this body temperature water for like 90 minutes, and it's the most amazing, relaxing experience, and takes a little getting used to because they also call it like sensory deprivation, which I think has a really negative,
it sounds like some kind of torture.
Yeah. But it's actually, like in the dark, it's some places like have where you can control the lights and music, so you can do it to whatever, tailor it to what you want. But the idea is that the water is the same temperature as your body and the air, so it all kind of equalizes. So the more you relax, your body just kind of almost disappears, and it's a very relaxing, meditative space to be able to just kind of unwind and unplug from life. And so that's what I'm doing right now to kind of manage self-care as I ramp up to this new book season.
Yeah.
And I go and I float every other week, and I wish I could do it every week.
Yeah.
Because it's just a great way to relax and unplug from the stress and chaos of life.
Yeah, I laughed when you told me that earlier because I actually did one in Atlanta maybe 2 or 3 months ago. I did my first float it's called a flotation chamber. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's this giant white pod. And it's sort of, yeah, it's a very surreal, kind of weird experience. I had a little like panicky moment of like, because they shut the thing and it's totally dark. And
well, you don't have to shut the thing. I don't have to shut the thing.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
No.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to do that.
Okay.
No, I go to the flotation cabin where you get in and it's like a room and you just kind of close the door. You don't have to like close yourself into the coffin thing.
This is not a pod. Okay, that's good. That may be a better fit for me because it was a little bit chilling. But yeah, once I relaxed, it was very meditative and reflective, and you can pray in there if you want to. So it's been fun. So anyways, I'm glad that you've incorporated that into your self-care regimen. Yeah,
I'm loving it. The more I do it, the more I love it. So.
Cool. Well, Amber, this has been awesome. Hear me say thank you for your voice. I am sorry for the rejection and the grief that you've been through, but I am so encouraged and inspired by how you've processed that, how you've landed in what seems like an incredibly healthy place, how you're living a new and inspired life with your wife. I've been saying this for months, really years now, that what the world needs, what the church needs is more people like that, more people like you, putting your story out there, engaging this conversation with grace and empathy and love, and just pointing people towards Jesus and pointing people towards a life of freedom, because I know you're like me and that's what we want for LGBTQ people. Yeah. That's what we want for our parents as well. And we want people to live in peace. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much. I feel like if our stories can help anyone, it makes the journey that much more worth it. Totally. To know that you're helping, what you've gone through can hopefully help someone else not have to go through as much. So,
yeah. Final question. Tell us, how can Harbor parents find you? How can they buy the book? Tell us all the things.
You can order the book now on Amazon. I hear that the people that have pre-ordered were starting to receive it yesterday even. Nice. They were getting it early. So, yeah, you can go ahead and pre-order it on Amazon. You can check out my website, ambercantorna.com. We'll be listing tour dates next week on release day. We'll be announcing all the dates. A couple of them are floating out there a little bit already, but we'll be announcing full tour next week. And you can follow me on all the social media things at Amber N, as in Nicole, Amber N Cantorna.
Cool. Once again, Amber Cantorna, the name of the book is Unashamed. Harbor parents, pick it up on Amazon today. Amber, thank you so much. We wish you all the best.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely.
You too.
Thanks.